have you downloaded the presentation? It's on the desktop?
Yeah.
Okay, I can do it. I can do it.
Start, this is yours, huh?
This one, this screen, yes, okay.
So, hello? Yeah. So welcome everybody. I guess we should start, even though people are still in break mood outside. I welcome you to this session, which is titled Beyond the Client-Server Paradigm. We are actually discussing or tackling a couple of issues that have been issued in this morning talk, and I hope every speaker doesn't wear a tie, so you will make it through the presentation. We have actually three interesting presentations, and the first one comes from the SERENE project and is given by Yannis Mitsos. Yannis received his PhD from the Technical University, or National Technical University of Athens in 2003, and he since then works for the Greece NREN JRNet as a project manager in the SERENE project. And you're presenting to us how to extend the JEON2 and the user-oriented network services towards Eastern Europe. The floor is yours.
Good morning, thank you everybody. So, I'm going to give a presentation about the SERENE2 project. It's a project funded by the European Commission, partially. A few words about its main objectives. Actually, there are three main objectives. The most important is the second one, the one that is, you can see in the second bullet, that is to tackle issues relating to the digital divide that exists at the moment in our region, namely in the Balkans Peninsula. However, there are two other accompanying, let's say, objectives. The first one, of course, is to extend the ZEANT network into this region in places and in countries where they do not have at the moment ZEANT connectivity. And the last but not least, of course, is to assist those national research and education networks in those incubating actual NRNs in those countries to fully establish themselves in this big picture, in this big pan-European picture. There are many definitions and many works undergoing at the moment. Just to name a few, there is this work about the earnest, let's say, work that is done in order to quantify the digital divide. However, you may find a lot of different definitions. One I found, I think it's very, depicts very nicely the current picture, is that the digital device is first and foremost the lack of ability to access any kind of, let's say, digital access. That can be either internet or email or fax, whatever, mobiles. And just to give you a few numbers, it is measured that 1/4 or 1/5 of the world's population do not have any access to such kind of services, which is quite important. Furthermore, you can see on the picture on the top right of the screen, this red line. You can see in the other countries located in the center of Europe, a very nice dark fiber cloud with many lines. However, this picture is not the same when it comes to the Balkans. Our work actually is to help these countries in order to participate to this big cloud, this pan-European, let's say, efforts, and extend these black lines over our peninsula. So a very nice also, let's say, picture taken from Stanislav Sima, our colleague from the from CESNET, Czech, let's say, national NRN, is this one that depicts on a map all the dark fiber connectivities at the moment. You can see, if it is possible, with the red lines, a few of them which are cross-border. Please keep in mind that there are actually very few of them, some of them in the CERN in Switzerland, a few of them in the Netherlands, and also in Italy. So you can see again that there is no, it was not any dark fiber availability in our region, which is not anymore, let's say, the case. I will come back to this later on. So a few words about the project. As I told you, SERENE2 stands for Southeastern Europe Research and Education Network. The number actually denotes that this is the second initiative, the second project that we have in the last 6 years. It's a project of 30 months, financed partially by the European Commission by 80%, 20% by the beneficiary countries. It has a duration of 30 months and a budget almost approximately of 3 million euros, sorry. Of them, 70% is dedicated to connectivity fees, and that's very important because you realize that we have almost less than €1 million for all other activities. This is the map, as I told you, this is the current topology, except at the moment that the Albania is not connected to the backbone network. However, all the other connections are at the moment live. I'm going to give you a better overview later on. So, if you remember, I told you that the most important and critical objective of this project is to ease the digital divide in our region. But how is this achieved? The first measure we take against this problem is to upgrade the infrastructure in our region. So this can be done by many different means. First of all, by supporting our neighborhood NRNs. So at the first stage of the project, when we have a requirements capture, we realize that another NRN that's in our region, which is actually part of the Zeand cloud, had many problems with their connectivity towards Zeand. So we decided to support them by finding some way to give them some redundancies. At the moment, the Bulgarian NRN now has 2 different connections to Zeand, so there is no need. Actually, there are very few times when they do have outages in both circuits, but the problem still exists. So the first way to ease the digital divide is by supporting your neighborhoods. The second one is by upgrading the national infrastructures. This has been done the last month, for instance, in Fyrom and also in Montenegro, where the utilization of the links were fully, both links were fully utilized. So we have decided to upgrade the links, actually to double them, in order to give them the ability to use more and more resources of the network. And the third and the most important objective, most important mean, is by deploying cross-border dark fiber connections. So we're very proud at the moment that the SIRIN network has 2 of them. The one is the international connectivity of a country that's called Bosnia and Herzegovina, you can see over there. So the international link at the moment is a cross-border fiber of 1 gigabit, going into Serbia and Belgrade, and after that it is dispatched either to the north through HungarNet or to south through Greece to the Zeand cloud. So this was, let's say, the second achievement of this project. The first one was the establishment of a backup link, the one between Serbia and Hungary. You can see over there on the left picture, the black line. So you realize now that the backbone of this network has a very good redundancy, has actually 2 different accesses, one through the north, to Zeand always, one through the north through HungarNet and the other one through GRNet. Of course, another objective of this project is to assist those in incubating NRNs to participate in those efforts. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we fully support them in order to get, let's say, either in new organizations, like for instance Terena. So last year we were very happy to see that the Montenegrin NRN, a very new country and a very new NRN, has recently, actually 5-6 months ago, joined Terena. There are other efforts however, to liaise with other initiatives like CNET, or for instance to become members of the Zeand community. Some countries at the moment are observers, observers in this community, and we hope pretty soon they will be able to enter to this big and very important project. A few words about the services that we offer at the moment. This is a very nice picture. You can see which services have been deployed in the past and which services are to be implemented then in the next month, let's say. However, this picture is not 100% correct because there are some of them which are very difficult to be implemented. However, we have conducted some feasibility studies Just to name a few, I think that at the moment it's very difficult to provide bandwidth on demand or quality of service in most of our core routers, since some of them are very much utilized and they cannot have, let's say, quality of service provisioning. But this is something that we will be tackled in the next month. So among them, we're using a trouble ticketing system. We have GRNet offers it's a help desk to the network. So through a trouble ticketing system, we have a mean of, let's say, monitoring the whole thing. The main active and passive monitoring is done by a tool that has been developed by our Serbian colleagues that's called NetIIS. There is also some synergies, liaison activities with the Perf-Sonar, the GN2 GR1, and we're using some other source tools, some other open source tools. I will come back to this later. We have a network database to keep all essential information within. Of course, we have enabled IPv6 connectivity to all core routers. Furthermore, some countries are progressing very well in this respect. They are trying to push IPv6 not only to the core border routers, but to propagate this connectivity up to the end users. I think at the moment that in the context of the Syrian, that Bulgaria is doing very well in this prospect. I mean, they have already deployed IPv6 connectivity in all core routers of their backbone. We also have set up, let's say, a web page that you can find on the web. You can immediately have access to all those tools. And the new feature that we have deployed in our tool is the SLA management. I will come back to this later on. Just a few words about this tool, the NetIIS. It's a web-based tool. It's fully deployed in Java. It is hosted in one of our servers. It is a passive and active monitoring tool at the same time. It has a very nice graphical overview. It is offered to other NRNs, it's offered to the other community as an open source. Oh, no, sorry, not an open source. It is offered as a free software, but it's, this is only for NRNs. For all the others, it's actually offered as a commercial tool. It's used now, if I remember correctly, in Serbia for banks and things like that, big organizations. And one of the most important things that has been integrated in the past was the SLA reports management ability, namely in the context. So we have SLA agreements as all NRNs with our providers, and we have to find a way in order to measure, to find if those agreements are satisfied. So this tool actually generates reports every month to see if the outages, if the problems that we have in the previous periods are in accordance to the contractual obligation of the provider. You can see a very nice picture. As I told you, it has a very nice graphical interface with some pop-ups. You can go through all of the statistics, and you can see the graphs, utilization, etc., etc. However, one of its main, let's say, drawbacks is that the tool does not monitor, let's say, services. It's only used for circuits and connectivity. So in order to have, let's say, a better view of the services, we use the smoke ping in another server, in another location. It's hosted somewhere in the middle of the network in Bulgaria. So we have, let's say, redundancy in those tools. At the moment, you can see the IPv4 and IPv6 graphs for a specific period of time. Furthermore, we have some alerts from this tool whenever one service is not operating or we have a major problem. The trouble ticketing system is based on the well-known request tracker. It's an open source tool. It is hosted in the main server of the Syrian 2 and the Syrian 2, let's say, network. I think that, suppose many of you have already seen it. It's quite very popular. It is used mainly to communicate with the help desk, so everybody can open a ticket. The ticket is propagated to the help desk. The help desk is responsible to call immediately the providers and update its status and so on. This is another interesting tool. We had a very good collaboration with the Gentoo, the Joint Research Activity 1. Also keep in mind that this graphical interface of a persona has been developed by one of our colleagues, the Bulgarian RN. This is another service that we offer, so we can have a better view of the let's say of the cross-domain connectivities. You can see in the map, for instance, the utilization of the link, some statistics over there. You can even trace route and have some results. This is, let's say, one of our liaison activities that we have done in the past. Furthermore, we have developed, actually we have deployed some other services, some more advanced services. We have a very good collaboration with the Lobster project. It's an IST-funded project. We have deployed a sensor in our network in order to have a very precise overview of what kind of traffic is exchanged through the core routers. You can see some, let's say, statistics over there. And on top of this, we are now at the moment of establishing some CSRT groups in those countries. We have identified the need of having such kind of, let's say, such kind of activity, since in the past we had some outages caused by those attacks. So we need to find a way to address this issue. Furthermore, now the SIRIN2 network is also a playground for some ongoing activities. As I told you, we are offering we are offering our network for the same consortium that has developed the Lobster, in order to have in order to test another tool that is called NEMU, Network Level Emulation Tool, which is actually a passive monitoring tool that that monitors the traffic that flows through the circuits, and can detect polymorphic attacks, which are very difficult to be identified by other means. So there are no labels, there are no signatures, and this tool is doing very well if you consider that it's hosted in a Linux box and can capture, let's say, 2 links of 34 megabits, 1 link of 1555, and do real-time analysis on it. Furthermore, in the context of the SIRIN2 project, Terena, which is leading, let's say, the work package related to liaison and training and dissemination activities, done very nice work. We have done in the past 2 successful training events, one in Heraklion, Crete last September, where we had a 3 days training event. You can see that the subjects that were addressed in this event were actually quality of service issues. It was a full day training sponsored mainly by Juniper. We had also the lack of having the developers of NetIS to introduce their tool to our APMs. Last but not least, the synergy with people from the Persona. They have made their first training of this framework in the context of the SIRIN training events. Furthermore, last March, on a mountain of Kopaonik in Serbia, we have, let's say, conducted our second training event. Voice over IP and identity management, let's say, issues were mainly addressed. And last but not least, as I mentioned to you, the importance of having liaison activities with other efforts is very important for us, mainly because we give the ability to the people of the NRNs that do not have direct access to those services, to those, let's say, studies or task forces, to get familiar with them. Most of them have been already, let's say, mentioned in my presentation. So, for instance, we have initially we have a very good collaboration with the Persona team. Very, very good collaboration with the 60s project. That was, we have already participated in a training event in Brussels. Now the 60s is also targeting having, let's say, a second event in our region, in Bulgaria, Sofia, next June or July. So many people from the SIRIN, let's say, consortium will have the ability to attend and get familiar with IPv6. Some liaison activities with other projects like ELISA. We have also, in the past, we are actually trying to find additional resources for the project because, as I mentioned to you, 70% of our budget is dedicated to this, let's say, connectivity fee. So we have to cope with all others. We are trying by contacting, let's say, other funding bodies or industrial sponsors to help us with our work. And last but not least, we have, let's say, integrated technical advisory board that consists mainly by people that are working many years in this, let's say, region. Just to name a few: UCL, Nordunet, Juniper, Cisco, Merton, Alcatelus, and HP are members of this technical advisory board. So more or less, this concludes my presentation.
Other questions, comments? So then, to warm up, I'll put a question subsequent to our opening plenary. You mentioned you are going to deploy multicast. What type of multicast are you going to deploy? Any source multicast, source specific multicast, MBGP?
This is quite very difficult and tricky question. I think that people are in the room who knows better than I do what's going on at the moment. So I cannot give you an answer at the moment. I'm not so technical oriented. But I think that at the moment the multicast has been enabled in our backbone network. I'm not 100%. I'm not going to give you the correct answer to this. So I think Dimitrios may better know than I do what is going on. So
you're going to talk
the
on
next
that, yeah? Next. More questions?
Have you done any customization for a request tracker to correspond to your needs in the network trouble ticketing, or are you using this simple solution?
Out of the box? No customization at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We might in the near future, we might put some, let's say, add-ons about the shared team, but at the moment it is as it is. Quite difficult to be installed. We had some problems in the past, but now everything has been overcome.
We have room for another question or comment. Are you aware of the amount of IPv6 traffic you have in your backbone? I mean, the percentage or something?
I can present you the graphs. I mean, we have graphs. No, I don't know. I don't know the figures at the moment.
Okay. So then let's thank the speaker again.
Thank you.
We will proceed to our next presentation, which is once again from the JRNet. It is Dimitrios Kalogeras. Is that correctly pronounced? That's very difficult for me. He studied at the National University of Athens, received the PhD in 1996, and since then works for JRNet. Yeah. And actually, Dimitrios is presenting something which is more related to multicast, and actually is a, well, I find very fascinating idea. So the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. I don't need that. Okay. No, it's okay. Okay. So the idea is to build a massively scalable VPN service using the old any source multicast model. Of course, this could be extended to model which is a bidirectional PIM, which is more appropriate, but we want to give an idea of how you can do that with a current multicast that works in a lot of NRNs. So what are the popular VPN solutions today? We have PVP over L2TP over IPsec, where you have your IP packet, which is encapsulated over PVP, which then again encapsulated over L2TP, and again encapsulated over UDP, and carried through IPsec. You see, you have 4 encapsulation techniques, one after the other in tandem. Another solution is to have IPsec in a tunnel mode where you have IP packets encapsulated inside the IP. And then you have a non-standard solution, which it's not standard because it's not mandated by any RFC, but it works. And it's used quite a lot today in users. It's being built with the OpenVPN. You have IP packets encapsulated into TCP with the SSL, so you bring encryption with the SSL, and then passed on with a plain IP. So you see here that you have IP packets on top of IP. So the trend is today is to use a central VPN concentrator. This is common used in enterprises and even in a lot of NRNs. Oops. So what's the issue with having a central VPN concentrator? You have a single point of failure, and you have a reliability impact. So if you have a problem with a specific point with a specific hardware, you cannot deliver a service to any part of the VPN, and you might have a security impact, because if you find that there's a problem with a specific concentrator, then you know that you have to upgrade the specific point, and this could impact the members of the community. So, of course, there are other impacts we can say as an impact, but the issue is that when you have a central point of service, then you have an impact on resources that you have to deliver in order to give this service. So it's the CPU and the network. So when you have concentrators, you see aggregation of network resources near the concentrator. So the alternative is to use a point-to-point technology instead of a hub topology. So this is what we're going to have. Instead of having a central point, anyone could speak to the others in a seamless way. So the point-to-point communication could be done through a multicast cloud. This seems initially seems to be quite controversial, because in multicast you have point to multipoint, and you don't have point to point. So how you can do point to point with a multicast? So we're not going to need to have a need for a central VPN server. So we're going to use multicast as a shared medium. This is a technique that was used quite a lot 3 years ago, something like that, in order to have IPv6 early deployment. So it was used for such a transition mechanism. So the idea is to have an election of a predefined common multicast group as the shared medium. So we define that our medium to be a specific multicast group. So each node should subscribe to this shared medium by issuing an IGMP join to a specific group. Transmission inside the shared medium are received by all the receivers. So any node can transmit messages to the shared medium, G, and there is no contention inside the medium. So anyone can send packets in this medium, and there is no contention that when one sends a packet, the others cannot send packets also. So all VPN members are directly connected to the layer 2 VPN. However, inside the packet, in the UDP, because multicast is a UDP by definition in IP, we send not plain IP packets, but we send Ethernet packets. So we have one Ethernet frame inside each UDP packet, and the UDP destination is equal to the multicast group, and the UDP source of this packet is the actual IP address. The Ethernet source, it's the host generated MAC address, while the Ethernet destination is something different. This is where things start to change. So the main principle is that here we have Ethernet packets inside UDP packets. So here we make this convention. We have a duality between the Ethernet and the IP multicast personality. You remember that we have to define what would be the destination Ethernet address for the encapsulated packets. So we're going to use a virtual VPN source MAC address, and we're going to have a mapping. So we need to have a one-to-one mapping between the global IP address and a VPN source MAC address. And the mapping is that if we have a source IP 1234, the VPN source MAC is 0808, and this just a convention that we can have. I mean, the only thing we should take care is not to clash with the real vendor MAC addresses. So for each signal node, we need we have a real global source IP address, and we have a virtual VPN source MAC address. So the packets that were the Ethernet packets that we're going to encapsulate have a source VPN source MAC address, which is being generated by the IP address. In that sense, the MAC uniqueness is guaranteed. So here, how it starts happen, and assume that we'd like to have a communication between host A and host C. So host A sends a packet to the VPN LAN. VPN LAN is something which has a multicast destination group, which is this specific group. So then the Ethernet that is being encapsulated inside has this specific address, 0808 in the prefix, and then it follows with the IP address, you see, 1234, and then here, in destination, we say that we want to speak to the virtual MAC address 5678. It's a virtual MAC address. It's not a real MAC address. So here, the packet, because it's multicasted in the outer layer, is going to be sent to all the subscribers. So subscriber B receives the packet and forwards through its network stack, while host C sees that this virtual MAC address does not belong to him, so just rejects the packet. So you see, here we have a way that host A can communicate with host B in one direction. So we have to solve the other direction also. Of course, it's possible to hide many VPN MAC addresses behind one single IP address. So in that case, you need a way to learn how, MAC addresses behind other MAC addresses. That sounds like a learning MAC algorithm approach. But in general, it's possible to have one-to-many relationships between the global IP addresses and VPN MAC addresses. So example could be that we have instead of 0A and alpha and XX, where XX could be any value, and that could signify that you have a lot of MAC addresses behind this specific one, which is very nice for virtualization setups. You can have hierarchy in terms of VPNs. So it's possible that you can optimize this specific setup, because you can follow what the modern Ethernet switches do. They have MAC to port lookup tables, so every MAC can have a specific virtual port mapping. You can deliver broadcasts, and you can deliver packets with a known destination to all ports. We haven't done this, but it's possible that we can follow what a common Ethernet switch can do. And packets, which the real optimization is that what we can do is packets with known destination MAC address correspond to IP using unicast. So let's see how this happens. So again, we have a host A which sends a packet to a VPN LAN. And here you see that here the MAC, it's the virtual MAC, it's not the real MAC. Okay? So subscriber B receives the packet and adds the appropriate entry into the MAC to IP table. So now we have a virtual, let's call it like that, virtual ARP, where you have a 1, 2, 3, 4, which is this specific host, correspond to this MAC address. And this is in the virtual ARP table inside the host B. So it's possible then for host B to communicate directly without having any multicast through unicast to host A. Of course, the communication would be done not through the multicast cloud. So what's the implementation like? Implementation is very easy, and we took advantage of a specific kernel interface that has been built for OpenVPN. It's called the Virtual TAP 0 Ethernet device. It's a device, it's a virtual device inside the kernel which accepts Ethernet packets. So we use this as a bridge between the kernel space and the user space. So we have a user space application which does the following. It reads packets from the dev NTAP device and writes them to a UDP socket. You remember UDP is the outer layer. While when we read packets from the UDP socket, we write them to the DevNet TAP interface. I'm going to show you in a schematic way in 2 slides. So what is the ingress data flow like? So you have a packet which arrives from the network, and you read this packet from the socket, the ordinary socket, the multicast socket, and then you do a parsing between the MAC to IP pair in the virtual ARP table, and then we encapsulate the packet, and then we have an Ethernet packet, and we write this packet to the DevNet TAP interface, because this specific interface can understand Ethernet packets. You can send Ethernet packets to your kernel without having them sourced through the wire. You can send them through the TAP interface. So then the kernel sees an Ethernet frame and does what it would have done having that received from an ordinary Ethernet interface. While this works quite the opposite in the other way, when we want to send the packets. So we want to send the packet, so we're going to generate a frame inside the TAP 0 interface. We're going to, and when we write the packet into the TAP 0 interface, the kernel will receive that, and it will match. It will match the MAC to IP cast table and send the packet out there. So this is how it's gonna work. So you have this is the egress. So you have a frame which is generated, and then it's being sent to the character device, and then you have your application, which is this specific one, the VPN client application, which resides in user space, while the rest of that resides in kernel space. So we read from the device, and then we write this to a multicast socket. So this is the egress data flow. So when we receive a packet, we read it through the multicast socket. It's like a common application. And then we write this encapsulated data inside the TAP device. TAP device reads the data and sends the data back to the kernel. Oops. So the frame is delivered inside the TAP 0 interface, and the kernel believes it's an ordinary packet. So what are the security considerations? This application is, it's not a secure VPN, it's just a VPN. So what if you'd like to add security? You know that multicast is not the solution that you would pick up for having security. So, however, there are some new RFCs. It's called the Group Domain of Interpretation, which provides security, secure communication between multicast listeners inside the group. So it's possible that if you locate, if you build a specific server inside this group, you can deliver security. However, this setup of having a specific point inside your VPN which delivers security has the same cons with having a central VPN server. You have a single point of failure in terms of security. So, however, this is how it's being handled currently with, in a standard way. You have this group domain of interpretation. It's possible, of course, to avoid that and having, after the initial communication, having IPsec between the 2 points. I don't know whether you can you recall that it's possible when you have the initial communication that the 2 hosts can communicate with in a unicast way with their IP addresses and their virtual MAC addresses. So it's possible to do that in a tandem way, you can say that, using IPsec back-to-back with a VPN LAN. And of course, it's possible to use any other solution like HTTPS or SSH. And the conclusions are the following, that you have quite a bit of resiliency. You need no central server. So you just depend on the routing and forwarding of your network. So if this breaks, of course, you're not going to have any type of communication. Scalability. Scalability is I think, one of the main points of this solution, because it can scale to a very large number of nodes. You can have 2,000 members inside a VPN or any big number, provided that your forwarding and routing functionality can cope with such big numbers. So if you need a really big number, you can go with a bidirectional PIM and have a very robust solution. What about the transparency is that the fact that TAP0 is an interface which makes the majority of the work in our case. So it seems like an ordinary Ethernet interface. The implementation is quite simple. So it's portable to any platform that understands tune or tap interfaces, which is the case for Linux and Windows currently. So as a matter of fact, it's quite easy to have a VPN solution which is portable through operating systems. However, it has the drawbacks, which is, as I told you, the security provisioning, which could be somewhat tricky. However, this is particularly tricky for any secure multicast group communication. And the drawback is also that you need a multicast to all nodes. And although this might seem common for NRNs and campus networks, it's not the case for your home network or your enterprise network. Some operators just disable this. So what are the future ideas is to have physical gateways to VPNs. So we'd like to have a gateway where we receive virtual Ethernet encapsulated inside multicast and have it forwarded to real Ethernet. So you can build networks which have Ethernet, virtual Ethernet, and Ethernet, and you have gateways. So it's possible to step from one paradigm to the other. And here we need a bridging device for a real Ethernet with a TAP0, and we can have packet filters, of course, and many virtual VPN numbers inside any physical entity. You can, I mean, as a matter of fact, this morning came up with another idea that you can test other solutions given that. You can test likely MPLS-T implementation. Imagine that you can take data. If you manage to build a tunnel interface for MPLS-T, then it's possible that you can make virtual VPNs. You can make, sorry, VPNs with a MPLS-T on top of IP. So it's a kind of prototyping for testing new framing, you can say, or forwarding paradigms. So thank you very much. And any questions addressed to me or to my colleague Thanasis? Thank you very much.
Question, what kind of equipment you have on user side or on site before distribution? Is it something original, manageable switches?
Yeah, it was your plain switches that you, I mean, in terms of Ethernet switches, you mean, or in terms of equipment?
Ethernet switches, or which port you have to connect to the user?
Ethernet switches normally broadcast, multicast packets. So you don't care. I mean, if you have broadcast enabled in your switches, or if your switches can understand multicast even better, they can deliver the packets to your end host.
Can I say that it's unmanageable switch?
It depends. I mean, there are a lot of variants in unmanageable.
Is it possible to have any dump hub and hub 100 megabit switch without any?
I don't know whether. I mean, it depends whether they can. I mean, I have tested that with a 3-COM unmanageable switch and it worked, but I cannot make a promise for any type of unmanaged switches.
Okay, is it necessary to support IGMP in your end user switches?
No, because IGMP is only is between host side and router side. So no, because IGMP snooping limits the broadcast traffic inside the switch. So if there is no such a functionality, other ports receive the traffic. So there is no optimization for if you don't have IGMP snooping, but it works.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Other questions, comments? I mean, Turina has always been a mix of brand new ideas and well, operation. This is part of the brand new ideas. Any comments further? Well, then let me put a question. I mean, you mentioned the security issues. There are several of them. You extend a shared medium like to an internet-wide shared medium, and then you first of all you extend the problem of man-in-the-middle attacks to, well, to a global scale. I mean,
yeah, as I said, this solution is a VPN solution. It's not a secure VPN solution. So if you like to have a security inside, you have to follow the RFC which has been published for secure multicast. So you need, again, a group of domain of interest, which is the way that IETF mandates how do you bring security with a multicast group. So it's something which is not designed for.
yeah.
However, you need this specific component in order to be able to handle communication. However, you can do that with the security in terms that if a specific group has a preserved key, then you not have a problem. The point is, how do you share the key?
Yeah. Yeah, but what I wanted to mention is that you extend the normal man-in-the-middle problem to a larger scale here.
As a matter of fact, man-in-the-middle problem is a problem even if you have one switch in the middle or you have...
Sure, but now you extend it to a global scale. Yeah?
That doesn't make the problem heavier or easier. It's the same if you have one device which is untrusted, or you have thousands of devices you have untrusted. The point is in security to make a secure association between the end devices, no matter how many devices are in between. So you need a separate way to bring security. This solution does not address the issue of security, but the issue of how easily you can set up a VPN. You can build security on top of that. Like with a...
Well, you could solve the authentication authorization problem by IPv6 using CGAs, but have you thought of extending this to IPv6, which is a problem in your address translation?
No, you mean I see your point. I mean, to have the IPv6, to have a virtual MAC addresses following. Now I made a kind of correspondence between IPs and virtual MAC addresses. So I don't follow the benefit of having the IPv6 in what sense? Can it help?
The benefit is you can have self-authentication on packets by using cryptographically generated addresses, and you can't do this in IPv4. This would solve some of your problems in security.
In that case, you just rely on the router. In that case, that you share a router, secret. You and I mean, as an end device and your router, because when you have the IPsec, I mean, in the initial negotiation of duplicate address detection or routing announcements, and you have IPsec in there, as a matter of fact, you are sharing a secret between a router and the end device. So this is a different type of trust, where you trust the first router in your domain. As a matter of fact, I mean, we're trying to see how such a solution could work with this new RFC, if it's possible, and come again with the new improvement
versions. Okay, more questions, discussions. We still have time, so the speakers were early. If not, so let's thank the speaker again.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And proceed to our last talk. We are going up the layers. Now we go up to a peer-to-peer system, and our last speaker is Rosa Martin. Is it correctly pronounced? Yeah, Rosa Martin from Spain. She graduated from Polytechnical University of Catalunya in, I don't know, you didn't say, in the 90s probably. And since then she worked as an IT project manager at Barcelona School of Informatics, and she's also in the I2CAT Foundation as the manager of a project you are speaking about. And this talk is about a peer-to-peer system you are going to build, or in the process of building, for sharing audiovisual content, by using this JEXTA framework.
Thanks, Thomas. Good morning to everybody. As Thomas said, I'm going to explain you our experience sharing audiovisual content using a peer-to-peer environment based in JEXTA. This is the past experience and the present work we are doing. I will first introduce you to the context where this work has been done and the technology we are going to use. And then I will explain you the projects we've been working on, and to end with our conclusions. Well, this is the work we've done in several projects that were promoted by the I2CAT Foundation. And they have different objectives, but the common objectives of them is that we've been working with peer-to-peer technologies. In the first one, what we did, and I mean our work did here, our group did here, was to develop an application that was called eRUC. That RUC in Catalan means donkey, so you can see the similarities to some popular peer-to-peer applications. What we wanted to do here was an application to share audiovisual files using peer-to-peer. In the second project, we work on a mobile peer-to-peer application. And finally, the work we are doing now is related with live peer-to-peer streaming. Just to remark the context and the participants of this project, I come from the Barcelona School of Informatics, And the work my group has been doing is the application development. So I come from the application world, not from the work. And we collaborate with other research groups from different universities in Catalonia in these large projects. This work is financed by the AutoCAD Foundation because there are several objectives that are common to this foundation. This is the application distribution, high quality media distribution over IP, mobile multimedia applications. Why did we choose peer-to-peer to share audiovisual content? Well, first of all, because it's a model for application decentralization, and nodes can act as client and service at the same time and cooperate to offer the services. It's also a very extended technology. You know that it represents an important percentage of traffic in internet now, and it's also quite efficient technology for data sharing and collaborative work and some other applications. Because this technology is very popular because it has a great opportunity now. Because there are a lot of nodes in internet, we have more powerful user equipments and better connections. And a lot of people think that this is the content distribution medium of the future. Of course, if some security and digital right management issues are commonly solved. And also, there are a lot of possibilities for research and innovation in this area. Why did we choose Jigsta? Well, first of all, because it's an open specification for protocols that offer services and infrastructure to develop peer-to-peer applications. And it facilitates the communication between different kinds of peers, not only personal computers, but also mobile terminals. It's an open software project, even it's promoted by Sun Microsystems. And the last reason was that it's independent of the implementation. You can work with different programming languages, different operating systems, networks, topologies, and also different applications, because the communication between the nodes is done using XML messages. What does Jigsta provide us? It gives us a mechanism to manage and control how the nodes, the peers, behavior. First of all, you can discover other nodes, keep the visibility, publish the resources and the services they are offering, and also you can discover the resources and services of the network. As I said before, this is done using a kind of messages that are called advertisements, that you can see there are some similarities to the multicast technology, naming, sorry. Jigsta also organizes the nodes or peers into subgroups. And this is very important because these groups are independent of the network topology, the firewalls, NAT, and the type of connections you have. And then it gives us a way to make the connections, communication between the nodes using what they call pipes. Well, this comes from Sun Microsystems, and you can see the difference between the physical network and the virtual network that is being used for Jigsta. A very important thing from the application point of view is that we have a unique identifier of each node that is a Jigsta identifier. So we don't need to know the concrete IP address the peer has, and we don't need to know the network topology. So this is a kind of dream for an application developer. Now I will start explaining to you the projects we've been doing. And the first one was 2 years ago. And what we did here, it was an application to share audiovisual content using peer-to-peer. The application architecture was using also web services, using SOAP, and peer-to-peer using the Jigsta platform. And it followed the standard MPEG 21, which is a standard to modelize audiovisual services. And concretely, we were using content management services, content adaptation to the device capabilities, personalization, and digital right management. We also decided to use different kind of video distribution systems. We wanted to use central servers, but we also decided to introduce peer-to-peer technology. And a very interesting thing we also used was the transcodification services in order to adapt the video files to other formats using a grid service. And finally, we were using distributed authentication and security by using a single sign-on system. This is the global architecture, and I think this one. Well, maybe I can. Okay, just to remark that by using SOAP, we had the access to complex services like the transcodification service. So we had access to the grid by just using a web service. But for the sharing the audiovisual files, we were using peer-to-peer, and in this case, we were using Jigsta. How the authentication and security was provided. We had a central server for authentication that was a web server, and what we did was to use a username and password to access the services. We were getting a token that was based on SAML, and then this token was used to access all the web services of the architecture and also the Jigsta peer-to-peer network. Okay, how the content distribution was used in ERUC. The semantic metadata, that is the category of the video, the director, and this kind of information, and also the licenses were stored in central services. And using SOAP, we could access these services. But also, together with the metadata, we were storing a reference to the physical location of content. And using this reference, we could use central servers or use an external servers addressed by using a URL, or we could use peer-to-peer, that using this kind of reference as peer-to-peer I2CAT. So we knew if we had to go to the peer-to-peer network or just look for the content in another place. Just very briefly, how did we try to integrate basic content protection mechanisms? What we were doing was if we wanted to distribute the file in the peer-to-peer network, we could cipher it, and the key to decipher it was stored together with the licenses in the DRM module. So when the application verifies if the license is valid and the user is authorized to access that content, then the application gets the key and can decipher the content. This is a very basic protection mechanism. But what we were doing was not to decipher the file completely, but while we were visualizing it in the player. How Jigsta was introduced in this application? We were using basic services that Jigsta provides us. One of them is to find the initial information of the group members, that is the rendezvous service. Another one is the membership service that what does is to accept or deny new members of the I2CAT peer group. That was the group that we were using to share all the information. And in this case, in this place was the place where we introduced the authentication of the system, the single sign-on system, by providing a JAS module that was checking the token that the authorization server had given us. Well, we also used the content manager service of Jigsta, that is a file sharing module that we were using adapted to audiovisual file sharing. From this project, we can say that the result we had was basically that we were able to publish and download files from a peer-to-peer network, so we gained some expertise. We used this file sharing together with basic protection mechanisms, and we were able to use this for other innovation projects, like the one we made with local televisions in Catalonia. But the system we implemented was very basic because we were downloading the complete file from another peer. So this is obviously not very efficient for large files like the high definition audiovisual files. So the next project we did was the mobile media project that had a lot of objectives related to advanced mobile multimedia applications like context-aware technologies or digital television. But the one that was related with this presentation is that we wanted to evaluate the possibilities of using peer-to-peer technologies in mobile-based applications. This was a very short project of 4 or 5 months, so we didn't have much time to work on this. But what we did was to implement an architecture using JXME, which is an adaptation of JIX for Java mobile terminals that is adapted to the device restrictions. So we were using this to manage the presence control of the mobile terminals. And that was integrated in a mobile game, multiplayer game. So what we did here was to adapt the messages, the XML messages, to the needs of the project. We were also set up a proxy relay that comes from with JXME. So this proxy, what does is to forward the messages between the mobile terminals, and it compresses the messages, so it lightens the traffic between the mobile terminals. So from this project, what we were able to do was to connect different kinds of peers. Even that we're not sharing files using peer-to-peer, we were just keeping the presence control. So now I will explain you the work we are doing. And in this case, we are collaborating with the same research group that in the integrated research project, the first one I presented you. And based on our previous experience, we decided that which were the key audiovisual services we had to implement here in order to be able to have advanced services for the distribution and management of high quality media. And when I say high quality media, I'm referring to high definition video files and so on. So we decided to keep on working on audiovisual services based on MPEG 21 standards, such as the digital right management services, the content management services, content adaptation, but also new ones like the session mobility. So we developed new services, but we also made some enhancements to the modules developed in the previous projects. And the new thing was that we wanted to work with peer-to-peer streaming. That was the work that is the work that my group is doing. This is the architecture of the machine project, and you see this is very similar to the previous one, but with some key differences. The first difference is that we have extended peer-to-peer technology to other modules of the system. One of them is the media servers. So we use, in this case, peer-to-peer to discover media servers in the network. So then we can just invoke a web service to make a transcodification, for instance. So we first discover the servers using peer-to-peer, and then we can use the web services to access the service. This is a case of use. The other one is yes. Okay. The other one is related with distributed search. And in this case, we are using web service to access the content management service that has all the metadata of the digital content, and we can make a metadata search that is then distributed through all the metadata servers using peer-to-peer technologies. This is transparent to user, but internally it works quite well. And the other case of use is the streaming peer-to-peer, and this is the work we are doing. So when we work with peer-to-peer streaming, we work with an alternative to IP multicast services. Not because we think this is better than multicast, but because multicast is not extended in global networks. So we think this is an alternative, good alternative to client-server models because it requires less bandwidth in the origin and is more scalable than these models. So there are some commercial and non-commercial applications already doing this. And basically, these applications, what they do is to build an overlay network of different peers that share the segments of the buffer that is being streamed. And depending on how this overlay network is built, there are several approaches. What we did at the beginning of the project was to study and analyze the previous research work that has been done on this area and to decide which was the best alternative for us. So when analyzing these overlay networks, which is the best one, the best way to do that, you have to consider that the nodes, the peer-to-peer nodes, can connect and disconnect at any time. They are not reliable by itself. And then the control messages that you have to use to maintain the overlay network shouldn't add too much overhead. Then to optimize the peer-to-peer network, you have to minimize the packet losses, the first segment arrival time, and the point-to-point delay. So based on those research work that has already been done, we decided to use the .NET architecture, which is a quite efficient one. And then we decided to keep on using Jigsaw services and protocols because first of all, it makes it easier to integrate with other modules of the project, like the ones I said to you that we are extending the peer-to-peer technology. The second reason that it gives us independence from the topology of the physical network. And finally, it allows us to speed up the development process. However, Jigsaw made that an extra overhead to the .NET protocols and that can make them lose their efficiency. And this is something we must check. So we are developing an application and testing it in order to see if Jigsaw combined with .NET is an efficient technology for peer-to-peer streaming. So what we are doing is developing the CoolRock application that allows users to send and receive live stream of video or audio. This peer-to-peer multimedia stream is originated at one point, and the stream is sent to the other nodes using peer-to-peer. Each node implements the .NET architecture and uses the Jigsaw services and protocols to implement part of its functionality. And I will now detail how the peer-to-peer node works. At the stream originator side, what we do is to use a video LAN player to stream from a file or from a live source. And this stream is sent through an UDP port. The application has a special component that is called VLM input adapter that receives the stream from the video LAN and stores it in the buffer. Then the buffer is divided into data segments of the same size that will be the segments that will be shared among the peers. Okay, another component, important component of the architecture is the .NET Manager. And this component, what does is to create, the originator side creates a channel where all the rest of the nodes will connect to download the stream. Another important component is the membership manager that manages the set of nodes and members and that are in the network and may redirect new connections to other members that will act as deputy nodes. You have to know that all the receivers make a first connection to this node, to the origin node. And this allows us to introduce some user access control or other digital right management functionalities. We can introduce them here in the stream originator or in the deputy nodes. Now we will see the stream receiver side. At the receiver side, the CoolRook connects also to the .NET network through the .NET Manager and looks for the channel that it wants to visualize. Then it connects, it does a join, here again. And then he gets a deputy node, an alternative node, from the members list of the originator. So the originator node can answer and manage the new connection of this node, or can delegate to the deputy node. So the deputy node sends us a set of nodes, a candidate node, that will be used to decide which of them will interchange information with us. Just to simplify a little bit, I will say that some of the nodes that we get from the set of these nodes we get, there will be a subset that initially will be chosen randomly that will interchange information with this node, with the receiver node. And these nodes are called partners and are managed by the partnership manager. So what do partners do? What they do is to exchange the buffer maps, their local representation of what information, which segments they have locally. So they send each other these buffer maps that reflect who has which information. And then the scheduler manager uses a special algorithm, that's the .NET algorithm, to determine which is the best partner from which to download a concrete segment. And of course, it uses the information provided by the partner's buffer maps. And finally, buffer segments are read by the BLS output adapter that sends through an UDP port, and this is visualized by the video LAN player. So this is more or less how the peer-to-peer streaming is working, and I have to say that we have already developed this application and we are testing it. Of course, there are a lot of things to improve because there are a lot of parameters. You have to decide how you make the segment size, the buffer size, how many new connections can the origin node manage, and so on. So there are a lot of things you have to parameterize, and it depends, of course, a lot of the kind of audiovisual file you are dealing with. When you go to high definition video files, this is tremendous. I mean, it's very difficult to get good results. So we are at this stage, we're doing the testing, but we have also to integrate other functionalities that have been developed by the rest of the research groups. And this integration is a must in this project because that's the way we have designed it. And there are some that are very interested also for a peer-to-peer application. In the case of the security, we have Also, we are also working with a single sign-on system like in the previous project, but in this case we are using certificates and the tokens are based on SAML 2.0. We are also working on S-Secure RTP, and this probably will be integrated with a peer-to-peer application by putting a module between the video LAN player and the Coolrook application. So we will be able to send Cypher streams to the other side. We are still deciding how we are going to interchange the keys. Probably we will also store them with the licenses in the digital right management service. We also have extended some functionalities of the digital right management. Before we had some licenses that can establish the conditions for playing a file. But now we can also say how you can adapt these files, and if you can change, for instance, the resolution of a video file. We have also introduced, as I said before, distributed search for metadata in the content management service. And there are some other people working in redundancy media services by introducing balanced clusters of media servers. And another point that I think is quite interesting and is new than from the other project is session mobility. So we are working on providing a service in order you can go to another device and start playing the video at the same point that you left it when you change, even if you have to adapt it to a new format. This is a full picture of this working package of the machine project. We have a poster outside in the I2CAT stand, and if you want more details, I can just try to explain you or address you to my colleagues in Barcelona. You see this, we are just starting integration, so we hope that by October we'll have an integrated application with all this functionality. This is, for instance, how the session mobility works and the distributed search. And finally, I will explain you our conclusions at the moment. We think that peer-to-peer applications represent a vast area of technology for innovation and research, and that a lot of work has to be still done here. It's already used for audiovisual distribution of a large scale number of users, and all of you know BitTorrent as a peer-to-peer application. We have used successfully Jigsaw peer-to-peer technologies to discover services dynamically, to share audiovisual content files, and to connect different kinds of services. Our current work what intends to determine if Jigsaw peer-to-peer application can do high-quality streaming and video-on-demand services. And the integration we are going to do with the other research groups' developments will allow us to generate a powerful distributed application to share audiovisual content. And finally, I would like to thank all the people that is working in this project, and also I would like to thank you for your attention. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rosa. Other questions, comments?
Hi, I have a question about the security, the encryption that you use, that maybe you can clarify because I'm not sure I understood it correctly. As far as I understand, what you do now is you encrypt the file that you want to distribute, and then you have the keys that can decipher it on the run when you display it on the client side. But then you mentioned using SRTP. Is this a different approach, and why would you want to do that instead? I mean, is that a better approach somehow?
Okay, I will, just one moment. But in the first project, I explained just, yes. I'm not sure if I'm choosing the, okay. In the first case, I was explaining the first project we did, that was the ROOC application. So here we are sharing files, but this is not a live stream. These are just audiovisual files. So what you can do before sharing them is to cipher them. This is quite
Okay, so it's a difference between on-demand, really
Okay.
download, and then live in the other project.
So
That's
what we
okay.
were doing was to keep the key with the information of the digital right management service. This is the first case. In the second case, you can do live streaming, so this is quite different. And in this case, what we have done is to use the secure RTP. So the ideal solution will be to have a plugin for Videoland that could implement this ciphering. But there are some people working on this, but it seems it's not ready now. So we are using an external application that does the secure RTP. So we will put it, okay. So what we plan to do, and we just decided to do it in this way last week, so this is very recently. We plan to put a secure RTP application here. So from the point of view of the CoolROOC application, it will mostly be the same. But we will have to provide the key to the cipher. Well, in this case, the key will have to be stored in some place, and we think that the best place probably will be in the digital right management service again. Okay.
Okay.
But
Thank
if you have any idea, that would be.
No, but I understand now what the difference was.
Okay.
Thank you.
But then we shouldn't wait for the mic, but I can say it before. You should have a problem with group communication if you use secure FTP, don't you?
We have what? Sorry.
Problem with group.
With the group communication.
So, repeat it with the mic. We were just discussing on the question of Dan, the security, and you said you just decided to use secure FTP.
No, RTP, sorry.
Secure RTP.
This is well, it's a streaming, secure streaming protocol.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and this supports group communication. Yeah. More questions?
Let me ask you the following: when a node in the overlay, every node in the overlay acts as a stream stream server. Is it correct or not?
All the peers, every node, can act as a stream server. This is very important in peer-to-peer applications. Yes.
So is it possible that at some point that, however, when you have a stream service, it's important to keep the rate of the traffic at the threshold where you can decode the stream, because if it's video, you need a specific rate on your receiver side. Is it correct? So did you receive traffic from one or for different points of the network?
No, you receive the traffic from different points of the network.
So is it possible that that the overall traffic, the traffic that one can give you could deteriorate, and you're not going to receive the amount that needs to be received in order to have a, let's say, homogeneous decoding on the decoder? I mean, at some point, I mean, you experience that in, let's say, when you stream over HTTP, that at some point you have a network deterioration and you are not receiving with the
As I understand,
the rate that you want.
it's possible that you lose packets, of course, but I think this is not as reliable as if you set up a stream service based on multicast. But
this is a common service also in multicast. There is no flow control. So there are other protocols. So my question here is, what is the flow control for in the intermediate nodes, because the receiver knows that he has to receive a MPEG to 4 megabits per second. So in the network, there should be somewhere a flow control.
No.
How do you guarantee that the receiver would be able to receive aggregate 4 megabits per second for a specific movie?
Well, of course, you are assuming that the end nodes have enough power to do what you intend to do. That is, for instance, to visualize a high definition video files. But you don't have only to do that, but you have to reassemble the buffer segments. So they are not intermediate nodes. I mean, all the nodes can be playing the video file while they are sending to the rest. So I'm not sure. You are not sending all the stream to other nodes. You are sending only part of the segments you have.
You're not obliged to send this with a specific rate. You have to send it like a bulk transfer. Is it correct? Or?
I think that what we do is that the size of the buffer map depends on the bit rate you are using. So we make this adapted to the.
But in any case, when you decode the stream, you decode from a file. You are not decoding this from the network. Is it correct or not?
We are decoding it from the buffer.
Oh.
We send the buffer to the UDP port, so the video LAN sees that as a stream.
Could this framework also be used to implement a real-time communication application like a peer-to-peer SIP client? And do you plan to go in this direction?
Well, maybe. We haven't thought about that because we have designed the system just to send a stream, a live stream, just in one direction. You mean that you are asking me if we could do real-time communication? We should test it, but we are pushing the system towards a high-definition video files. So this is what we tend to do with this project. I think it would be quite interesting to do that also for live communication. In fact, a lot of peer-to-peer applications are working in this area, but maybe with files of less quality or normal video formats.
For the last, I have a very practical one. You're using the StuNet algorithm. Are you providing an implementation, or are you using just a library to do this?
No, the DONET is an algorithm that is published by some researchers, and so we are using the specification they written, and we have implemented it. I don't know if the I2CAD Foundation will give this as an open source software. Probably. I'm sure that if you collaborate with the foundation and when you have any kind of relation, they will give you without problem.
So then, thank you all the speakers and the audience for this lively session, and I hope to see you after lunch in one of the next sessions. So, this is great.